I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't at least explore this option. You owe it to yourself and your family to at least look at that option and explore it. We've been misled to believe that dentistry, more specifically the dental business, has to be complicated. Dentistry can be simple, and dentistry should be simple. Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of the Dentistry Made Simple podcast. Of course, I'm T-Bone, your host, and this week we're going to be continuing on into the last phase of our Dental Business Made Simple framework, and we're going to be talking about the optimized section for this. So before we get into this week's episode, we have our co-host back, and so we'll turn it over for the face of radio, Meredith Cooper-Jones.
You sound surprised I came back.
Well, with all the stuff going on in my life, you never know.
All right. So before we get started today, I have a Google review of 3D Dentist. If you haven't either left us a Apple Podcast review or a Google review of 3D Dentist, we would greatly appreciate it. This one says, I recently attended a 3D course and was very impressed with the instruction and facility. They provide everything you need and break down all the complicated mess of implementation into easy starting steps for you. The instructors are ready to answer questions and even take one-on-one time where time allows to discuss your own unique situations to help you better relate to the content. The retreat is also very nice and a great place to come together with other colleagues and maybe make a few friends. Everything is taken care above and beyond, leaving any attendee only to focus on learning and growing in a very comfortable atmosphere. Great courses for helping breaking down implementation and not drowning you in the science.
Wow, that's
so kind. I did not write that, I promise.
That was a well thought out
It was.
and thoughtful review. That is phenomenal.
Well, if you are interested in coming to the retreat, we have our 3D business boot camp has been great. It's taken off. We have a few spots left for June. And then also if you are looking to add implants, dental implants into your practice, we have a lot of exciting stuff going on with that. June is now sold out, but we have a couple dates in the fall for you to start implementing implants, guided implants into your practice.
Yeah, and of course, sleep apnea with Erin, that's always good. She's doing those on the road a little bit this year.
So Tampa's sold out.
We just did California. Tampa sold out?
Yeah, so we have Raleigh.
Wow.
Raleigh
So
is next
I guess
in
June. June is your next opportunity if you want to learn to implement sleep apnea. So that's awesome. So what are we going to talk about this week,
Well,
Meredith?
before we get started, today we're going to talk about the phase 4 of the Dental Business Made Simple framework, and this is kind of the core of 3D Dentist. So it's kind of exciting to be a part of this on the relaunch of the podcast. So optimize is the 4th phase, and that's just, to make better or the most effective of a situation and the profit growth of the practice. Yeah. So talk to us about, the profit growth all kind of stems from the overhead.
Yeah.
So I know you break it down into like 5 different.
Yeah. So, I want to back up for a second. And what I mean by optimize is this is where, I'm kind of feel like I'm in that phase of my career, and it's really about going from good to great. Okay. And really you reach a point in your career whether you've achieved all that you want or you can, or you're like, listen, this is kind of who I am. Family life's so much important to me, or I don't want to put the effort in to do the work that it takes to get to a certain level, but I'm very happy with where I'm at. And it's really about going from good to great. It's really about, in my opinion, incremental profit growth. In other words, like when you add implants to your practice, you have a you can have a big jump. Yeah. And it's hard to save your way to that type of revenue or profit growth,
change,
that kind of thing. So really, optimize is about going from good to great, focusing on truly optimizing what you got. And I want to just a gentle reminder to everybody that remember this Dental Business Made Simple framework isn't linear. Now, overhead is important throughout every process. Business automation is important throughout all of the steps. But, for me, I didn't focus on my overhead with the fine tooth comb that I'm starting to focus on it until kind of now, because I'm hitting this optimized stage. There's very few procedures left to add into my practice. We've got 8 operatories and we're running 3 dentists. There's only so much more you can do, but you want to continue to grow your bottom line, or you want to manage your bottom line. So that's really what this phase is about. It's not about giving up. It's not about kind of getting complacent. It's far from that. And so Meredith had talked about a little bit about overhead, and really, look, I'm not an accountant. I'm not a overhead guru. It's never been an area that I focus on highly. Like, I'm not bean counting, as I like to say.
I think that goes with your comma versus decimal mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to do a podcast
Yeah.
on the comma versus decimal mindset.
Well, I've had a lot of people ask me, and maybe this kind of goes into the end of this, but I've had a lot of people who come through the course, where do we order certain things? Where do we order this? Do we buy cheaper versions of this? And I always say, he's not really one to nickel and dime.
I am. I'm a nickel and dimer, but not
in the sense that people would expect,
Yeah.
though, you know?
Yeah,
We could do a whole thing on that, though.
yeah, we could. We could just make fun of me the whole time,
Yeah.
But there's 5 areas of practice overhead that I focus on. Okay. And so what I'd like to do is list those out, kind of go into them, at a high level. But number 1 is facility. And what facility is to me is everything I need to be able to practice dentistry. And that's going to be literally the facility, whether it's a lease space, whether it's you own the building and you're renting it to yourself, whether it's the pipes, the electrical wiring, the renovations, all those loans that are associated with that, the utilities that kind of go with that. And I also put equipment into facility. Now, equipment to me is going to be core equipment. That's going to be like your chairs, your hand pieces, all of those things you literally can't do dentistry without. I'm not going to put like a CEREC machine or a CBCT into facility, because, in a way it is facility, but, those are optional items to a certain degree. So that's one, is the facility component of it. And, typically speaking, we like to see facility in that 5 to 10% ballpark. And so in a newer practice, when you have a build out loan and things like that, it's going to be closer to the 10% ballpark. And in a practice like mine, that is a mature practice, it's been around for a long time, it's probably going to be closer to that 4 or 5% ballpark. So the next is team. And the team part of the practice is quite frankly, it's the highest component of overhead. And your team to me is all your human capital. That's your front office people, your clinical team members, your assistants, your hygienists. Also, team would be any outsourcing. Outsourcing is a bigger and bigger component of what we do. In our office, we bring a dental anesthesiologist in. That's part of the team. In our office, we also do a contract with a dentist to come check hygiene occasionally and to do some fill-in stuff. So that's part of team to me. And where one area that I do differentiate how we track team overhead in my world is something I learned from the DSOs is I put dentist compensation into team overhead.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, so I include the dentist compensation and into team overhead. So with all of that being said, typically team overhead is probably going to be closer to 45 to 50% of your practice revenue.
Where do you put, say you lose a team member and so you use a third party to start verifying insurance or to do medical billing, where do you put that? Because that's replacing, it is a service, but it's replacing
all those things are team members to me.
Okay.
So
I agree.
That'd
people
be like
may not look at it that
that's
way.
a contract labor line item,
Yeah.
Or a service specific. Like I wouldn't include Revenue L and Modento into team.
No.
But I would
something that a human in your practice could be doing, but you're outsourcing to someone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would be the pay of a team
So
member.
we look at the team overhead, and that typically is in the 45 to 50%, maybe even slightly more than that, especially given what's going on right now.
What's going on right now?
Well, it's just it's a lot of issues with
knows.
team members, and all of that. So, so that's kind of my big difference. And I believe in paying all dentists like associates. So if the market rate in your market in your area is 25% for associate, pay yourself 25%. If your market rate's 30%, pay yourself 30%. If your market rate's 35%, pay yourself 35%. If your market rate is 35% and then minus some lab bill, pay yourself that way. Literally pay yourself as a team member, so you can really pull out what your business income is. So that was number one, was facility. Number two was team. And number three is in business term, it's cost of materials, cost of goods sold. And that will be in our office. That's our supply bill. All the stuff we buy through direct vendors and through our distribution partners, our laboratory bills, and our what I call biologics, or your bone membranes, implants, pins, tacks, all of that stuff. Those are your materials, or your cost of goods sold. Now, one thing that I do, or I encourage offices to do, is on the lab side of things, I like to really break that down when possible. Again, once you get into this optimized phase, so I break it down into ortho lab, my sleep apnea labs, and my implant lab. So I want to keep a good eye on that, so I can start having a measure of, hey, we're doing, I'm just making up numbers here, but they're somewhat kind of true. Hey, I'm doing $400,000 in sleep apnea, but my lab bill's $200,000. Something's not right there, right? Because if you lump it all in, then something's not good. Something doesn't look right. And lab expense in the traditional model has been in the 10% ballpark. In the CEREC model, that lab bill drops down to 4 or 5%, and in my model, it's 10 to 15%, because we have higher lab bills, not because we pay more, but we're doing procedures that have a higher percentage of lab bill. So that's kind of where I look at cost of goods sold and materials. So again, the first category was facility, the second category was team, the third category is cost of goods sold or materials. The fourth category I'd like to talk about is marketing. And marketing is going to be varied, very much so, on what phase of your practice career you're in. Like I'm in a phase where my marketing budget is, like 3-4% right now. But we're getting ready to launch into a growth phase where I want to do mainly hybrids, so I have to attract those types of patients, more of those patients.
For a specific type of patient.
Yeah,
but as a startup, their marketing totally
10%,
different.
yeah,
right.
so it's not unusual for a marketing budget to be 10% in the startup world.
They're also their income is not as high as well.
Yeah, the revenue's not as high.
Right.
Yeah.
So then that means it's going to be a higher percentage.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you got to understand that. But it's an important thing to kind of keep track of. And look, I believe that you should always be marketing. Okay, you got to be spending some money. If you don't have zero, and marketing is where I put in services like, any of these dashboard services, any of these patient communication services, any of those types of software as a service, that's kind of automation deals. That's where I kind of put those in. I put those into the marketing component, because in a way, the patient communication, like Revenue, like Modento, like XYZ company, those are marketing. That's what those things are designed to do. Any social media things like that, any services that you use there, that's marketing. If you're reaching a point where you have a dedicated marketing team member, I'd put that under marketing and not necessarily team member, just because I want to know what I'm spending to really market my practice. So again, 4 out of the 5: facility, team, materials, marketing. And the last one is miscellaneous, and this is the catch-all.
Gray area.
Well, number one, it's not always it's not just the gray area, but it's the catch-all. Office supplies, minor things that
team outings.
Yeah, like team outings,
CE.
lunches, CE, kind of all of those things to me fall in a catch-all of miscellaneous. And then, of course, any type of net business benefits is what somebody once told me to call it. If you have any business benefits that you try to legally run through your office, I would put these under miscellaneous expense. So, that's kind of fine-tuning the overhead. So, Meredith, if you don't mind, just kind of repeat the 5 categories that we talked about there.
So we have the facility, the team, the materials, marketing, and miscellaneous. And when you talked about some of the things in miscellaneous, you talked about some of the business or sorry, in the marketing, you talked
Mhm.
about some of the business
Mhm.
automations. So that kind of takes us into our next
Yeah.
um, part of optimize is what business automations. I mean, we don't have to talk about specific things,
Sure.
specific ones, but kind of just a broad idea. I know in the office we use quite a few ways, and
Yeah.
I would say a lot of these are just
Yeah.
communication between either the team, the doctors, the patients.
Yeah.
What are your
Yeah, so
thoughts on that?
so business automations, I've kind of got three things, and kind of in there, and it's really about communication
Hmm.
between the patient and the team members.
Yeah.
I've talked about, so that's kind of there. So let's kind of break that down a little bit. One thing that we were turned on to by Holly, who's my coach, is the use of Slack,
Yeah.
and
Which is a very corporate thing, you know.
yeah,
It's all
it
over
is.
TikTok as like a corporate thing. So you wouldn't think a small business or a team of 10 people would really benefit
Yeah.
from it.
So Meredith, how we use you've been part of our Slack. What are
Hmm.
the pluses and minuses, or how did you walk into thinking about Slack as an option in the practice?
Well, I thought it was just one more app on my
Yeah.
phone. This is annoying. Why can't we had a group text
Hmm.
forever, right?
Yeah.
But then it was hard because you go to text things that are irrelevant to
Hmm.
half the people, but it still has to be in the text. And then we start talking about funny things in the text because we are mostly friends. But then, we get one new person and it's like, ooh, let's not scare them yet. So everyone kind of backs off the text. So the nice thing about Slack is you can have different channels.
Hmm.
Like you could have a leadership where you could have your key team leads in there. So
Yep.
if you need something to send to just
Yeah.
them,
Somewhat private.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can direct message. I mean, as we get new team members, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even have her number.
Yeah.
You can easily direct message somebody, text me if you need me. And then also, people use it for day to day communication. We don't do that as much
Not during day to day,
during
like
the
during patient
office,
time.
but I know Sully's
Yeah.
office does. But their building is
Yeah.
bigger. They'll Slack someone directly, like maybe downstairs,
Yeah.
and say, hey, just a heads up about this patient this afternoon. Um, so it kind of takes on chat,
Yeah.
text message, also emails.
Hmm.
I mean, instead of doing like a newsletter of like, this is our plan for the next month, or remember we have a meeting or an event, it all goes in Slack. It actually links with the Google Calendar, and
Yeah.
each day it reminds you of events that are on the calendar.
Birthdays,
Yeah.
team outings, things like that.
And then we have like a fun
Yeah.
weekend side of it too, in a channel where people post about what they're
For
doing.
those
And
that want to be
yeah,
very
share.
personable,
Right.
there's those that are like very like I'm here for work and
Yeah.
this is what I do. I'm not interested in jokes
Yeah.
and
And then the
that
rest
kind
of
of
us
stuff.
are posting pictures on the beach.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So that's I think having some type of communication
yeah.
program. I think text chains get
Hmm.
you by for a couple of 2, 3, 4 team
Well, when yeah,
members.
right. Yeah.
And
Small,
then
and
there's limitation.
we still have small group
Yeah, but that's
messages.
separate from Slack,
Right.
right? But
And it's usually not work related.
but the nice thing about Slack is also there's a record of it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if like we've had issues where in the past I've said, "Hey, I'm going to do this," and I'm like, "No, I didn't," and the team members have literally gone back through and said,
Yeah.
"Well, here you go."
So
Right?
a great thing of this was Slack was amazing during the shutdown.
Yep.
You were able to post videos in Slack, and people delete texts that day. Like I have no storage on my phone, so like
Right.
right now I'm having to delete anything with like a video or photos in my messages. So having it in Slack is like it's still there where they can go back and go, oh, remember he was there for us.
Right.
He said he was going to do this. He's looking out for us here and there, and it was able to update everyone in a way that you knew people would see it.
Yeah, and so when you have HR, when you're an HR challenged person like myself, there's some negatives of having everything
When you are
written
HR.
back into it. So that's
No.
kind of Slack there, and you mentioned Google Calendar in
Yeah.
there as well. And one of the things that I use in our practice is I think it used to be called Google Apps. Now I think it's called G Suite for Business. And that's where Google, yes, it's Big Brother or whatever it may be, but we allow Google to run our office email. So it's connected to our domain, RaleighDentalArts.com or 3D-dentist.com. And that way we get to use Gmail as our email server. We get to use Google Calendar, Google Drive, Google Docs, Google Spreadsheets. So that allows us to have kind of like Slack has your communication. Now all our scorecards, our trackers, our patient trackers, all of these things are in a Google Drive that I can selectively share to certain team members or all team members.
Right.
Calendars, like, I don't know how everybody's, how complicated everybody's life is, or how integrated their life is into their office life. But mine's pretty well integrated. But so I share my personal calendar, my 3D dentist calendar. I share those things, my kids' school calendar. I kind of share those with the office, so I'm not having to write these things down. And the key team members or all team members have access to that, so they can kind of see, hey, if the kids are out of school, they know that I need that day off. Or like I have a golf tournament coming up for a memorial golf tournament for my buddy from a few years back, and so that's one Monday this month, and that's normal work day, and so I put that in the calendar, and that way everybody sees it and they know that, hey, I need that day off, and so
we live by these calendars.
Yeah,
people.
we do. Yeah, I
mean,
do.
it's like everything. You weren't on this, but I had to send a text to some of our leadership team at the office. This wasn't on the calendar, and this wasn't on the calendar, and this wasn't on the calendar. I can't help if I don't know, because we literally, I remember I didn't have a Google Calendar before this. It's like, now I can't imagine. I don't even know where I would be.
Yeah. And look, there's some negatives in having Big Brother Google have all this information. Listen, they're listening to us anyway. What the hell?
We don't put specific.
I put everything on there. I mean, that's my life. But having Google allows you to use the Google Calendar app on your mobile phone, the Gmail app on your mobile phone, the Google Drive app on your mobile phone. Whether you're Android, whether you're iOS, whether you want XYZ, you have desktop versions of it. So that's why I use the G Suite for Business for that. And then kind of, the next step of it is patient communication softwares. And this would be your RevenueWells, your Modentos. I'm sure I'm missing other ones that are out there. And along the same line as radio headsets. When you want to get serious about having great communication, radio headsets are phenomenal. And just kind of along the way, just generally speaking, every one of these things are met with resistance. Okay, Meredith's like, oh, it's just another app, and now you like, literally, I get it.
I'm in like maybe 10 Slack.
Yeah, and we use it at 3D Dentist until we get our own app, which I've been threatening for a long time.
Yeah.
So those kind of things are important. So that's kind of the business automations. It's really about communication.
The radios probably have the most pushback, but they are probably the most useful.
Yeah, because the radios are day to day.
Right.
Like Slack is, maybe after work every once in a while. Shared calendar is a kind of one thing. But our headset radios are literally
they
double,
can give you a
multiple times
heads
per
up,
hour,
so you can be ready for a patient before just bringing a patient to you and like throwing them at you.
So, as your office gets a little bit larger, as you want to really optimize, to kind of go with the phrase there, you want radio headsets, and you want Google Drive. You want Google G Suite for Business. You want to have Excel sheets. We keep our firm financial arrangements in Google Drive, so that way we have a copy of it that's accessible by everybody. And you want products
and
like
iPads,
Slack.
And then you have iPads that can bring them up.
Yeah, and the iPads can bring up all those things. And honestly, iPads should be part of, I think you bring that up. Part of business automation is, I think every operatory should have an iPad, because we can do our patient financing through that. We can do our firm financial arrangements through that. We can do our treatment outline through that. Those of you that are doing Smile Design, you can do that. You can do your consents and forms and all of that through iPads. So there's a lot of benefit to these things, and a lot of this where we started, but we really doubled down during the COVID lockdown, or the time right after COVID.
It gave people time to kind of reset.
Yeah, absolutely.
Step back, slow down. I mean, I think the people who implemented sleep is something that kind of takes a few months to get started on, and there's a lot of paperwork that goes into it. And so I think the people who took the time during the lockdown to implement sleep have done really well, because there's no other time you have that much time to update medical histories.
That's why you're saying we need them not lockdown?
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking to implement sleep or just hire a person.
Yeah.
So we've talked about going from good to great and the profit growth that comes with fine-tuning your overhead. We've talked about the business automations and kind of the key things that we use to automate the business and kind of run smoothly with communication.
So remember, if we go back to phase 3, which was about going from a practice to a business, Slack is so important to me, because I got to be able to communicate with team members
easily.
if I'm on vacation.
Easily,
You know, at the end of the
yeah.
day, yes, I'm vacation, I'm checked out, but look, it's your business.
Right,
You got to
yeah.
be somewhat available. And I like to be able to, I like on vacations to spend 30 minutes. Usually it's when I'm on the toilet. And, I like to just check in. I go through Slack and I'll read all the messages, see the scorecard, kind of get a feel for the
Yeah.
day.
Oh, that's another thing is
Yeah.
everyone posts their
Yeah.
scorecards there.
Yeah. So that, in our office, we do that. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So what's the last part of optimizing, Meredith?
The last part would be the exit strategy.
Yeah.
And I
This
know
is a
you've
fun
talked
one.
about there's a couple different ways that this
Mm.
can be done. And before we get into exit strategy, I want to say I think the dental business made simple framework. I know it's like a circle and
Yeah.
it's an ongoing process, but I think there's times where people can kind of go back and forth.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
It's not always like a linear,
Mhm.
even though linear circle wouldn't really make sense, but it's not always going in order.
Yeah.
But this is kind of because we know people that have done this
Yeah.
and then kind of started over, just
Yeah.
depending on what you want
Yeah.
or what your niche, I
Yeah.
guess you want it to be. But talk to us about the different ways that people can go about the exit strategy.
Yeah, so I break exit strategy down into three things, okay? And before I get into those three things, a few comments on exit strategy. Traditionally speaking, exit strategy has been something you did towards end of life, okay,
Yeah.
or end of dental life,
80.
or when we think of it as retirement, and I think in the modern world, it's 2022. Exit strategy is something that, in a way, should kind of always be on your mind because you never know. You never know what could happen to your hands. You never know what could happen to your life. And I think there's a value in going through exercises, going through a process just to see what it looks like, because it'll going through a process of an exit strategy and getting your practice valued and kind of seeing what's out there isn't hey, like I've gone through that, not because I want to get rid of my practice necessarily, but I want to see what it looks like. What does that look like? How long do I have to stick around? How long do I not have to stick around? What money do I get? Why am I only getting this much? How do I get more? Or why am I getting this much? Maybe now is the time to get, all these things kind of come up from that.
So you can figure out how to make it better when the time is ready.
Yeah, because then you're like, okay, this is what I need to do to get to this number, right? And so that's important. I don't think exit strategy is an end of life or end of dental life perspective anymore.
And then we also have known people who have had multiple practices, sold those, built them up, sold them, or sold them all together and started a more niche, implant only, cosmetics.
Any number of things. Yeah. John's going through that right now,
TMD,
right? So, so on the exit strategies, there's three core ways to kind of look at this. One is the incremental sale. Okay. In other words, you bring in associates and they buy in an incremental way. That's typically going to be like 25, 33%. If you ultimately want to be three doctors with equal ownership, it's essentially the partnership model. Okay, that's an incremental sale. So, for example, in my situation, I think our practice is probably a 3-doctor practice.
Right.
So at one point, maybe I'll look at selling 33%, a slice of it, to an associate. They become a partner now. The next time go around, I'll sell another 33 of my 66% or 67%. And that'll be the third partner, and then ultimately we become equal partners in this endeavor. So that's the incremental sales strategy. And for those of you I think this is something that's not looked at early enough in a lot of people in the modern practice. Is this, and so incremental sale is one strategy to look at. Another strategy is the traditional private full sale. In other words, look, I'm ready to walk away, or I'm ready to walk away in a year or two. I want to sell.
I'll become the associate.
I'll become the associate. You become the owner, top dog, HBIC.
Which is probably the most common.
Yeah, which has traditionally been the most common. I don't think it's
now.
going to be the most common moving forward,
Right.
necessarily. But so that's that typical model. And again, for those of you that are considering that, or you're in the economic ballpark where, look, you can't incremental sale a $600,000-$700,000 practice. It's just it doesn't make sense, right? You can't slice up a small pie, but so much. But
well, that's not enough to be worth it. You would do better as an associate.
Maybe not.
Unless you're looking. Some people aren't looking for more money.
Everybody's different, right? So, but traditionally speaking, incremental sales are typically going to be $2, $3, $4 million offices.
Larger.
The private full sale is typically going to be your $600 to $1.2 million practice. That's typically it. And personally, I probably wouldn't do a private full sale for anything more than $700,000-800,000. But that's just me. Because I look at it, there's got to be some upside. If I buy a $1.2, $1.3 million practice, really, where is the upside in something like that? And so that's there. And then the third one is it's a relatively newcomer, probably in the last 10 years, and for sure the last couple of years, and that's a sale to a quote unquote corporate entity, the DSO. And what I'm seeing in the DSO space now is there's DSO. There's corporate, DSO, DPO, Dental Partnership Organization, and now recently I read about a DLO, which is a Dental Leadership Organization, and so this is just lipstick on a pig. Ultimately, it's a way to dress up somebody else. You know,
Owning a percentage.
yeah,
A corporate
entity.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a group. It's a large group practice. I would argue that an incremental sale is a group practice, but
Yeah.
in today's world, a group practice is multi-location, centralized services, dental supports organizations, kind of where the term DSO came along, and so that's an option for a lot of practices. And where I fall into all of this is, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't at least explore this option. I've talked to a lot of, and typically they're a little bit on the gray-haired side of things, that they say, I'll never sell to corporate. And
well,
I get it, but
then
you owe it to yourself and your family to at least look at that option and explore it with multiple options, because in the corporate DSO space, there's the 100% ownership model, there's the partnership model where they're all going to own vast majority of it. So they're going to own 60%, 70%. And then, you're a 40% or 30% a stakeholder in the model. There's a true partnership model where, you own it, you bring in associates, and, there's lots of different models. And just like, everything else in life, there's lots of different organizations that you can belong to that have their pluses and minuses.
Yeah, and I think when you said people don't look into it early enough, they build these great, like you have built great, big, larger practices, and then they don't want to sell it, so they wait until they're 60, 70 years old.
Yeah.
A single person can't afford to come in and buy that, especially a young person who's just out of school with a ton of debt.
And at some point you get too big to sell it in slices.
Right, and then your only option is a DSO. But if you would have looked into it earlier, found people, prior, and they've bought in, then you only own a percentage, it'd be a little bit easier. So I think not waiting is keeping you to what you want.
Look, I think every few years you should go through an exercise of what does it look like if I had to exit. Whether you want to retire, or whether because like, holy shit, something happened to me, any number of things. And so you got to look through that model. And look, I just went through it because I like to go through exercises. I like to see what things are worth. And it was eye-opening to me is how they value practices, how some of the decisions I made affect the final valuation, because, look, at the end of the day, when you start looking at DSO sales, you're looking at 6 times to 8x EBITDA. And so if you spend an extra 10 grand on something, when it comes time to sell it, that's $60,000 to $80,000 that you kind of lost out on, because, so you really want to kind of do your cash flow based on when you need it. And that's why it kind of falls into the optimized phase there. Is that it looks at that. So that's kind of optimized, going from good to great. It's incremental, looking at the incremental growth from managing your overhead, managing communication through automation services like Slack, G Suite for Business, and looking at your exit strategy. And just kind of remember, everybody, this isn't a linear process. This is something that you can kind of jump around. But I really don't think you should be worried. This is my personal opinion. I don't think you should be worried about fine-tuning overhead. You should be worried about overhead, don't get me wrong, but you shouldn't be worried about fine-tuning and worrying about every 0.5% until you reach a certain size and you've kind of implemented the revenue engine, the clinical revenue engine, because that's where the real growth occurs in your practice, and then those kind of things. And don't get caught up in tech heaven with Slack and shared calendars. You can get paralysis from analysis and all this stuff, and really
typical dentist overthinking.
Well, typical, any high functioning human being kind of perspective. So keep all of this in mind, that we have 4 phases in our Dental Business Made Simple. Phase 1 is accelerate, slowing down to speed up. Phase 2 is your clinical revenue engine, working smarter, not harder. And honestly, we need to spend more time in these two phases. Phase 3 is for those of us that say, you know what, I want to continue to grow and get physically larger. That's going from a practice to a business, and that's the scale phase. And then phase 4 is optimize, going from good to great. And optimize, honestly, will have the least financial impact in your practice. The most financial impact will come from phase 1 and 2. The most time impact will come from phase 3. And then phase 4 is really about taking out every little, it's like squeezing blood out of turnip, basically. So thank you guys for tuning in. If we can help you at 3D Dentists, it's 3d-dentist.com. We have phenomenal programs and workshops built around helping you walk through the Dental Business Made Simple framework, and the retreat, and all of that stuff is so amazing. And now we have a nonprofit office, which we'll probably talk about here in an upcoming episode called Smile 3D. And so take everything semi-seriously, and we'll see you guys next week.